Okay, just a couple more seconds. Good morning and welcome to our Youth Town Hall. I am Commissioner Jo Ann Hardesty and I am thrilled to have this conversation with young leaders in our community. I want to start this conversation by talking about an initiative that I've launched from my office, which is called Rethink Portland. And it's an opportunity for all of us to rethink what does community look like to all of us. It is important to me that we have this conversation grounded in young people because, after all, you are the individuals that are going to inherit the mess that we have created as adults. And I think having your best thinking in this process is going to go a long way towards helping us rebuild a truly just, equitable city and a city where you can all thrive in. So, thank you all for joining me today. I'm going to have you all do some introductions so we'll know who the players are in the room. And before I do that, I want to give a shout out to some of our partners today because we could not have done this youth outreach town hall without having community members supporting us in this effort. And so I want to thank the Multnomah County Youth Commission. I want to thank Word is Bond, Next Up, and Portland Public Schools for outreaching to you fabulous young folks so that we could have this conversation today. And Adriana, I'm going to start with you. Would you please introduce yourself and tell us what school you're from, what your pronouns are, before we begin this conversation?
Hi everyone, Ariana, she, her pronouns. I'm 18. I graduated from Milwaukee High School. I go to Mount Hood Community College and I'm with the Multnomah Youth Commission.
Pleasure. Let's see. Ayaski, did I say that correctly? I'm horrible with pronouncing names.
It's Oishiki. Yeah, I'm Oishiki Nag. I'm 15. I go to Taggart High. My pronouns are she, her, and I work with Next Up.
Glad to have you here. Ar Arna? Iona?
Yeah, Arna, that's right.
I was right the first time.
Yeah, my name's Arna, she, her pronouns. I'm a senior at Sunset High School, and I also work with Next Up.
Pleasure to have you here. Aria.
Hi, my name is Aria Morgan. I'm 16 years old. I go to Wilson High School. I'm a junior, and I use she, her pronouns, and I work with Next Up.
Welcome. I'm gonna get this one wrong again. Help me. Let's see. Shalon. Yes. With the red top.
Sion.
Shion. See, I was so close. Shion. Thank you. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Sion. I'm 18. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a senior at Portland Christian and a member of Multnomah Youth Commission.
Welcome. Senior.
Is that me?
I hope. Did I mess your name up too? I'm gonna just go down the board messing up everybody's name. Forgive me, I'm old.
That's okay. I'm Senya. I'm 16 years old. I go by she, her pronouns. I'm a junior at Wilson High School and I work with Next Up.
Pleasure to have you here. Alana.
Hi, I'm Alana Nayak. I use she, her pronouns. I go to St. Mary's Academy, and I'm a part of a couple different things. I'm a part of PSEP, I'm a part of the Multnomah Youth Commission, and I'm a part of Raising Justice.
Welcome. Rudy.
Oh, okay. Hi, my name is Rudy Duncan. I use he, him pronouns. I'm 10 years old and I'm a fourth grader at Lit Elementary School in Southeast Portland.
Pleasure to have you, Rudy. Trevor.
Yes, I'm Trevion Crane, he, him pronouns. 18 years old. I attend Portland Community College and I serve a part of the Multnomah Youth Commission.
Welcome. McCullough?
Hi, my name is Mikolo Cabbage. You were close. I'm
Oh.
17. I'm he, him pronouns. I go to Sam Barlow High School. I'm here today on behalf of the Multnomah Youth Commission, but I also do work with the Oregon School-Based Health Alliance and sort of education and healthcare sectors. So.
Well, welcome you all. Oh, this is going to be very good. So we're going to go into our first question. Our first question is, what does community safety mean to you? And I'm going to start with and I'm sorry. I'm going to start with Adriana Perez.
Ariana, yeah.
Ariana.
So community safety to me is like youth being able to live a healthy life without constant presence of law enforcement. Instead, them having, us, youth having community support and resources.
Thank you very much. Um, Anybody else ready to answer that question? Put your hand up for me. Okay, let's go to um, Senya.
That was perfect.
Oh,
Community safety to me not only can take place in not having that constant figure of police violence, as Gianna mentioned earlier, but also I find that there can be safety in the opportunities that are given to youth in their community and the insurance that they have a future.
excellent. Anybody else want to answer that question? Alana.
Yeah, community safety means that young people are not afraid to step out of the door every day, that young people are supported by a variety of different programs through their schools and through organizations that they're a part of and from their family and friends, and that they don't live in fear every day of getting brutally murdered by police.
Thank you very much. Anybody else want to answer this question before I get to your questions? Because I understand you got good questions for me. Put your hand up and I'll call on you. All right. Maliko.
Yeah, so I think that community safety is in large part fostering positive interactions between enforcement and community members. And I think that's like reflected in a lot of the policy that we propose. And so I think that as long as youth are in an environment where they're able to, live their life without fear and without without the fear of negative interaction with police, I think that's gonna produce better results for communities overall.
Thank you very much. Anybody else want to answer this one? Otherwise, I'll get into your questions. Please. Shalom.
I also think community safety is also a place for youth just to have different alternatives, and not just only like one place to go to get safety. And also is really a place for youth to like grow in multiple aspects, whether that's through school or through like their activities or just at home with their families or just like any like regular time when they're in the community as well.
Thank you so much. So let's jump into your that was the warm-up question, right? To get everybody's blood flowing. But now let's get to your questions. I'm going to start with Trevon. What's your first question for me?
Yes, so first I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to voice my opinion for our community. I feel like before this pandemic, 3 issues that were important that haven't really been addressed in city budgets are education, mental health, and community resources. I work a lot with the Urban League myself, and one of the things that I see with our homeless citizens is all of them, they're homeless for different issues, but one common denominator is lack of opportunity. And with the ongoing defund the police movement, how can some of that money from the police be moved into different resources such as education and community resources?
And so that's a great question. Let me start by saying, as you know, the school district's budget comes from Salem, right? And it also comes from ballot measures that your parents passed to support additional school resources, right? And so we don't fund education at the city of Portland, right? But to your question about how to move some of the resources that we currently have into like community mental health, I know that mental health mental health treatment, and access to mental health treatment is really really hard and difficult to get even before the pandemic, and it's even harder to get now. And the reason is, quite frankly, is because we moved from what was state institutions around mental health treatment to what was supposed to be community mental health services. And we have never, the federal government has never fully funded states so that states could fully fund local mental health programs, right? So that continues to be an issue. I know that Multnomah County is attempting to build a mental health center downtown Portland that would have walk-in services for anybody who wanted to walk in and get either peer support or to get actually a counselor to help them work through some of the issues that are going on in our community. But it hasn't been built yet, but it's desperately needed. So one of the things that I think the city could do is really be a good partner with Multnomah County and making sure that this mental health center downtown is built. And the first floor would be walk-in services. The second floor would be a treatment services for people getting counseling. And then the third floor would actually be a living environment for people who need to be someplace so that they can work on getting their mental health back together. But again, it's still in the planning stages. And as you can imagine with the pandemic, it has slowed that process down quite a bit. But in addition to community resource, but your question around community resources, the city has done a good job, not an excellent job, but a good job of getting some emergency assistance out to community members to help community members pay rent, to get access to food. And so we've spent over $100 million has gone out the door since COVID started, actually to really impact people where they are, because this is the worst global crisis that this country has ever seen around the pandemic. And it has lasted a lot longer than we anticipated because of the lack of support and help from our federal government. So that was a very long way to answer your question, but I thought I would be thorough rather than just say we don't do this or we do that. Is that helpful? Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. I'm going to go to, let's see, Arana?
Yes, Arna.
Anna.
Yeah.
Trying to add another syllable into your name. Okay.
Yeah. So my question was that when we talk about repolicing, how do you when we've been with all the discussions that have been going on in the recent months, one of the things has been, like, I guess, the lack of trainings for police officers, like trainings on subject like diversity and equity or de-escalation tactics. So do you have a plan in place for that?
Oh, that's a great question. And so, let me just say that I don't think it's lack of training that causes our police force to act the way they do today. We train police all the time. Unfortunately, we train them as if they're going to war rather than being a community partner and solving crime. And so we need to totally reinvent why we have police officers in the first place. And in my mind, the only job police have is to solve crime, period, right? They aren't experts on housing or mental health. They're not experts on social services or housing. And so what we need to do is to shrink the role of police in our community. Today, when you many people call 911, they call the police for everything. You see a houseless person, they want a police response, right? They see somebody talking to themselves, they want a police response. And the reality is that this is not the police expertise. Their job should be solving crime in our community, and we should look for other first responders to respond to other community needs. So, for example, I've created a program with my colleagues at City Hall called the Portland Street Response. The Portland Street Response will respond to 911 calls, and they will respond to 911 calls that there's not a weapon or there's not a threat of weapon, but it's the calls that we get, quote unquote, for unwanted people, right? And so this team will be a 3-person team. It will have a EMT slash firefighter. It will have a qualified mental health professional, and it will have a peer supporter. So that 3-person team will roll out hopefully in January or February of next year. And what we'll start to see is the 911 response more fits what the need is that the community member is calling 911 for. I think that's going to help a lot because people won't be reliant on an armed response to something that really doesn't need a weapon to show up to resolve. Did I answer your question? Okay, I'm going to go to Senya now.
So, in a world where there's obviously a lot of racial disparity when it comes to the criminalization of nonviolent acts, just an example, the fact that African Americans are nearly 4 times more likely to be arrested for the handling of marijuana possession than a white person. So what are other examples of nonviolent acts that you feel are being overly criminalized and that you would like to move forward in making a change in that happening?
That's a great question. And so today, and in fact, over the last couple of years, 54% of people who've been arrested by Portland police, but for being homeless, would have never been arrested, right? And they get arrested for crimes that are associated with poverty. For example, loitering, trespassing, public urination, disobeying an officer's order because the officer says move and the person says I have nowhere to move to, right? We are criminalizing people because they are poor, and it's actually not illegal to be poor, right? So we have invested hundreds of millions of dollars in criminalizing people because we don't have housing people can afford to live in, right? We don't have alcohol and drug treatment available for people who need it. We don't have mental health treatment available when people need it. And so our knee-jerk reaction is to criminalize people because they are making other people uncomfortable, right? And I want us to stop doing that. I want us to stop arresting people for crimes of poverty. And I want us to actually use those resources to help people get housing they can afford to live in. Make sense? All right. Aria.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you for giving us the space to talk
You're welcome.
and address our concerns and our questions. I guess the number one question I have is, do you think funds from the police department could be reallocated for mental health resources in your street response team program?
We have already diverted $5 million from Portland Police Bureau in June to have a larger pilot program around the Portland Street Response. And so not only can it be done, it has been done. Can we do more? Yes. As far as mental health treatment, we don't have enough mental health providers that are people of color that are culturally competent and understand how people of color think and operate, right? And so we need to do a better job of actually helping young people of color get through the training they need to become mental health counselors. So I think that's a big problem that we have right now. And though the city itself is not responsible for actually cultivating the next generation of mental health service providers, I think we have an obligation to work with our partners, and that includes our partners at Multnomah County Health Department, to actually create a pathway for young people who want to be mental health service providers to be able to get the appropriate training and maybe scholarships to help them get through the schooling so that they can then come back and serve their community. I think we need to look at that as an opportunity to grow our own, since we know we don't have enough already. Nothing's that hasn't happened yet, but I'm certainly open to looking for opportunities where we would be able to do that. All right. Okay, let's see. I am now going to go to Rudy. Rudy, what's your first question?
Well, in May, after George Floyd was murdered, I organized a protest for Black Lives Matter on the Lent walking bridge over the 205 freeway. A few of my teachers and classmates came to the protest. We had signs and a big banner that said Black Lives Matter. A lot of cars honked and people waved as they passed. A few people did not seem happy and gave us the finger as they drove. But overall, I was very happy that people believed in the things that I believed in, especially that they believe that Black Lives Matter. I've been noticing a lot of things on the news lately, but one of the things I'm seeing on the news is that protesters are being beaten up by the police or being tear gassed. Personally, I think it was scary when President Trump sent federal police to scare away the protesters. Protesters are still brave, but I'm worried about and scared for their safety. The question to you is, what are you doing to keep these protesters from being hurt or seriously injured by the police? Thank you.
Oh boy, you don't mess around, do you, Rudy? Let me say, I absolutely agree with your assessment. I, like many people, see the videos of the police just really brutalizing community members. And ironically, before 45 sent his federal troops in to brutalize community members, as we know, Portland police were overreacting already to protesters. When somebody threw a water bottle or a brick or something at police, the police response has been to tear gas hundreds of people because a few people were acting inappropriately. I have been very vocal in my desire to both have the police bureau under my control, because I believe with strong leadership from me, I would prohibit police from even showing up at protests. In fact, why do we have police showing up, 30 police officers in riot gear protecting a office building, right? This is about people's lives, and it's not about protecting property. And so I have asked the police chief, Chief Lavelle, to make sure that we were able to identify officers. So when officers overstep their authority, we would be able to hold them accountable. You may know today they just have numbers on their helmets, and you don't know the name of the officer who's involved in the brutality that's taking place. We have to change that. I wish I was the police commissioner, because I could change it pretty much overnight. But because it's not in my portfolio, I have to work with the current police chief, Chief Lavelle, and the mayor, who is the police commissioner, and try to push him to do better. I want to make sure that that Portland police officers' response to protests is equivalent to what it should be. And what I have seen over and over again over these last 120 days is that the police have been very overreactive, and they are supposedly the trained professionals, right? Protesters aren't trained professionals, but police officers are supposed to be. And their responses have been anything but professional and appropriate to the situation. The fact that over 120 days, riots have been declared 100 of those days makes me never believe the police when they say a riot is taking place. We had a riot one day, and that was May 28th. But since then, what I have seen is police being really aggressive. And honestly, I think it's because we've cut their budget. And the public continues to ask us to cut their budget more, right? I'm committed to cutting their budget more and refocusing them on the job they were hired to do, which is to fight crime. Thank you for that question, Rudy. That was a fabulous question.
Thank you. Okay. I think you would be a great police commissioner.
Well, thank you. But I think so too. But apparently, the mayor has not got the message yet. So maybe a little bit of pressure on him will help to go a long way.
He needs to get the message. Sorry.
Yeah, maybe he'll listen to you. He hasn't been listening to me that much. We'll see. Um, uh, uh, um, I am so sorry. Miss Nang.
Do you mean me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'm
Thank
sorry.
you
Say
for
your name
giving
again.
us. It's Oishiki.
Oshiki.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank you for giving us the space to talk about these and actually talk with someone who has the authority to implement change. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
When it comes to police being held accountable for their actions, a lot of the times there are systemic laws involved, such as qualified immunity, that make it harder for people to get justice. So, regarding that, how will you try to change the policing system to make police held accountable for their actions?
What a fabulous question. So, how many of you are voting age right now? Put your hands up. Okay, all the voting age people are registered to vote? Right? Yeah? Okay, good, good. Okay. So the first thing is there's a ballot measure 26-217, which is a ballot measure that will create the very first truly community oversight board of policing in the city of Portland. It will be on your November 3rd ballot. I hope you will read it and support it. Now, why is that important? Because I have been working on police reform for 30 years plus in this city, and I can tell you that having the police investigate police misconduct doesn't lead to good community outcomes, right? So this board will be only community members. It will be overrepresented by people who've experienced policing. It will have a professional staff. It will have the ability to compel testimony, and it will have the ability to actually implement discipline up to and including firing police officers for inappropriate conduct. This will be the first in the nation because I looked at a lot of community oversight boards across the country to see what was working and what wasn't working. And this one will be the strongest community oversight board in the country. So a lot of folks are waiting to see us pass this so that they can start working on this in their community. But that's just one piece, right? So we got to fix who police feel they are accountable to, right? And this ballot measure does that part. We also have to change who we recruit to be police officers. Today we have one gentleman in Lake Oswego who pretty much certifies everyone coming in the door that wants to be a police officer. I've been asking for many years, why do we have one white guy in Lake Oswego making this decision, right? What we need is a panel, a diverse panel of psychologists that will review applicants for law enforcement all over the state to determine who's appropriate to be a police officer. Then we have to change how we recruit police officers, right? I would love us to be recruiting in high schools, right? Creating summer job opportunities within the police force so that young people get excited about a career in policing. But we have to change fundamentally how we do policing in order for policing to be attractive to young people, especially young kids of color, right? And so there's a lot that we have to do. But back to the qualified immunity, that is a federal issue. And our federal delegation is working on that. But until we change Congress, we're going to be stopped in actually getting that change through the congressional process. One thing I am working on here in Oregon is something called arbitration. The few times that we have actually fired a police officer, they normally will go to arbitrators and the arbitrator will give them their job back. And why is that? It is because we don't have a history of disciplining police officers for inappropriate behavior. So an arbitrator looks at the facts and says, okay, if other people have done that, did they get the same punishment? And today the answer is no. Therefore, that's why police officers who should be fired end up getting their job back. So we've got to fix that as well. But we have to fix who comes in the door. We got to fix the psychologists. We've got to fix arbitration. And we have to make sure that we're hiring people who are grounded in community, right? Not people who are coming back either from military service or people who think being a police officer means their job is to mandate community behavior. A lot of work to be done, but that's kind of the laundry list of what we have to do. So who have I missed in this first round? Put your hand up so I can see. Okay, Alana, let's start go to you.
Hi, I again want to thank you for taking this time to listen to all of us and hearing our questions. And I was just wondering, I know that I've been in a couple of circles talking about diversion, more mental health resources, all of these different programs to basically not have law enforcement involved and protect people. So how are you and how is the city making sure that those programs get the funds to actually get off the ground? And which programs are you really in support of?
No, I'm sorry. Name the programs that you mentioned again.
Yeah, like diversion, getting more mental health resources, getting more restorative dialogues happening between community members and between law enforcement community members so that we can avoid actually punitive punishment.
Right.
Those are the ones I'm talking about. Yeah.
Okay, so again, so when you think about diversion programs, I mean, in my mind, we should not be arresting people for misdemeanor crimes, right? And so if we decide that we are going to, rather than arrest people for misdemeanor crimes, put them into community, whether it's community restorative justice programs or whether it is into some type of community-based diversion, my preference would be that they're not affiliated at all with a criminal justice system, right? Because even putting somebody in diversion is you have a stick over their head, right? That if they don't complete the diversion program, that they're going to have some criminal penalty affiliated with it. Um, I think what we need are new solutions to some very old systemic problems that we have. And what I would like to do with some of the money that we have cut out of the police budget is to really start creating those community solutions. So, for example, I have said maybe what we need are community mediation centers, right? Where community conflicts don't rise to the level that people are calling 911, right? Maybe what we need are some training for youth, especially in high school, and how do you de-escalate conflict, right? Kind of mediator training. Um, we need to do things. We need to actually create new systems that help people to avoid conflict in the first place, right? We are in a time right now where everybody's anxious, right? Everybody's anxious because of COVID and because of the economic collapse, and people are trying to be educated on Zoom, right, on virtual platforms. Um, and what we must do is create new solutions to these very complex problems. And so I don't have the answer today, but what I can tell you is the city has set aside some resources that we could actually tap into to actually create these new solutions. We need desperately to not keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Um, let's see. Uh, Ariana, you have not spoken yet either.
Yeah, so I think you kind of already answered this, but one of the ways to reimagine what community safety looks like is to reinvest dollars in the community. So I guess, like, what are the top priorities for communities? Like, where will the money go to in the communities?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge that we have, right? Because as you can imagine, everybody comes into City Hall with a plan. They say, just give me money and we'll go and fix the problem, right? That's not a community solution. I think that's kind of an individual solution. That's why I'm having meetings like this so that I'm getting input from real community members who have a vested interest in our future. And so we have, for example, during the June budget talk, I set aside $1 million for a Black youth leadership program that will be owned by Black youth, right? So it won't go to the organizations that say they represent Black youth. It will actually be a process whereby the black youth on that committee will make the decisions about how that $1 million is spent, right? What do they want to buy? What do they want to invest those resources in? I've worked with Oregon Community Foundation because they will be the convener of this group. And the goal is to make sure that the young people that are on this oversight board have they understand how to run a meeting, right? What fiscal responsibility is, right? So making sure that they have audits, because when you're overseeing $1 million plus budget, you want to make sure you've got good financial controls. After the series of meetings, those young people will be deciding how those dollars are invested in our community, right? I'm very excited by that. We have Commissioner-elect Carmen Rubio, who will be taking her seat on the city council in January. And I've made a commitment to her to put another pot of money aside, just like I did for Black youth, for a Latinx youth, right? So that she would be able to come in and start putting together a very similar kind of program. I think the more we get young people as decision makers and how those dollars are invested, the better we're going to be. And so the only restrictions is for these funds is that the young people will have to go through this series of training so that we know that they are prepared to actually manage these dollars effectively. But after that, the decision making is totally within their hand. I did the same thing for our houseless population. I set aside $1 million so that our houseless community members could do a participatory budgeting process where they would decide how that $1 million was spent. Again, and both of these we just got the money in June, so neither of these programs are off the ground yet, but they will be over the next year. And I'm very excited about what's going to come out of those programs because the potential is phenomenal.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's see, who else has not spoken yet? Okay, Maliko.
Yeah, so today we have 10 youth with us, and so we all have at least some interest or involvement in change making, and we all have a particular interest in police accountability and reform. Right. And while we might agree on key issues, I think that there's some difference when it comes to our vision and our policy ideas of like policy implementation. And yes. So I kind of wanted to take a step back and ask you more broadly about civic engagement and focus on what we can actively do as youth and as members of the community. And so my question is, what are some compelling ways to pressure legislators into making policy changes, and how can we effectively build coalitions to advocate for those policies?
Excellent question. So let me say, I see myself as a community organizer. I was a community organizer before I was an elected leader, right? And so for me, I don't do anything without actually truly engaging the community. This series of community meetings that I'm having around Rethinking Portland, right? Rethink Portland is all about civic engagement, right? Hearing from as many people as possible what your priorities are, what you think the best thing is that we can do to invest money so that we get better outcomes. As far as Salem, I would say, do you know who your state representative and your state representative and your state senators are? If you don't, you should go online and look it up and find out who they are. You should show up at town hall meetings. They're all virtual nowadays. So, if you show up at a town hall meeting and get your question answered, that would be fabulous. The city has budget meetings, right? We've had budget hearings. We just had one last week. And so being able to know where to plug in at the right time with the words that you want to make sure are being included in a deliberation is really vital, right? I wish I could say there was a one-stop shop where you could go and get all the information about all the community meetings that are happening, but there isn't, right? It actually takes you to be very proactive to actually go looking for where that is. And so, but I would say for us, my commission Facebook page always puts very detailed information out because I know most people don't have time to do the research, right? So I try to be very intentional about making sure I share as much information as possible and then give people information about how they can plug in, right? So, and I think every office operates differently. I would say my office is the most grassroots focus of any office at City Hall. Um, and some legislators have lots of legislative meetings and some have none. So it really depends on who's representing you and what avenues they provide for community input. Does that make sense? Excellent. And last but not least, Salon.
Sion.
Before
But
this meeting's over, I'm going to have that name down pat.
alrighty. But my question is like, what policies or like things that basically could be or like have already been like provided for like youth to have like alternatives for like safety, whether they're at like school or in like their communities. And if there hasn't been like policies proposed, like how do you plan on like providing those policies for youth?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And I think I'm going to need your help in actually answering that question because, again, since we don't control the school environment, right? What I can control is the city environment, right? And so I would put that question back to you. What do you think would be the best way to engage young people in creating a more safe community?
I think for me, I think what would be best, obviously the SROs are, you know, for at least some school districts are removed, but I think oftentimes when kids go to school, they don't actually feel safe just because of what is like surrounded around them. I
Right.
think there are like oftentimes just in even, I would say school, but even like just in like their community, oftentimes um, the, I guess the stigma that some youth have based on this, their like um, identities that they have, I think oftentimes um, it's quite difficult for youth to even like have places where they can go to. And I think when it comes to even like those mental health resources or like diversion or just like things in general, programs for youth to have, I think it's not there and it's very not like accessible. I think that's one of the biggest things is accessibility, and it's not really there for youth. Um, and yeah, I think those are like the biggest things.
I think you're absolutely right. You know, I have visited a lot of schools around the Portland metro area, and the schools that I think provide the best support for young folks are those that have clubs, whether they're identity based clubs or whether they're politically based clubs. I have seen whenever there's an opportunity in school to be together collectively to talk about these kind of issues, right? Whether or not it's around intimidation or whether it's around racially disparate treatment or whether it's around um, over discipline in school, right? Because we know black girls are disciplined more than anybody else in our public school system, right? Um, I think anytime there's an opportunity to create a safe place within the school building where young people can come together and have these conversations collectively, that helps build strength to get through the other stuff. I mean, high school's hard, right? It's hard no matter who you are, right? But then you add the dynamic of race or ethnicity or class, and then it gets exacerbated. And so we need the schools to be more responsive to the needs of the students who are coming in the door every day. And I think the schools are really focused on they're focused on big picture ideas and not actually focused on what's the day-to-day experience of young folks who are in the schools. And I think I think that's a big challenge. And honestly, until we get back into school buildings where then you have the ability to actually advocate for what you need. How many of you have actually gone to a school board meeting and talked about what you need to support your education experience? So a few of you have, right? It's really important that you use your voice in a way that is that can be heard, right, by the people who you want to make that change. I've seen students use petitions, right, to collect signatures so that they would present that petition to the school board. There's power in that, right? Because then you're speaking on behalf of a whole host of students in the school who may not want to use may be fearful of actually standing up and asking for what they need, right? So, how do we empower young people so that they use their voice wisely? I think is really key, right? And some schools do it better than others. And so I think that's everybody for the first round. I am now going to ask all of you a question. So, what do you think are some of the misperceptions that older generations have about youth today? Uh, Alana.
I think that older generations have this perception that all of the work is left to us. And I think that, yes, it is left to us to do some work, but like the older generations can't give up now. I mean, I think that that's like really, really troubling to me, because if you guys are not making some changes, I mean, we're going to be left with even more mess.
That's right.
And then also, like, they have this perception that we are like, I don't know, I think that they have this perception that we don't have the power to make really real changes. Like, I feel like they have this perception that we're young and we don't know what we're talking about, and we can't make changes. And I think that that's so utterly wrong, because there's plenty of organizations that are youth led that are actually affecting policy.
Yes.
And I think that those are the two main things. But I also just think that we need help from everybody to make change. So I think that also, you know, older generations need to hear our perspective and not shut us down. Yeah, thank you.
I couldn't agree with you more with that. Okay, Trevon.
Yes, to piggyback on what Alana just said, I feel like the older generation, in a way, especially in the political world, should be more of a brother's keeper towards the next generation. It feels like a lot of the responsibilities and burden is going to be on our generation to fix what's already going on in our structure. And I feel like instead of, we're not really getting the torch passed, it's more like we have to catch it. So in a sense, I would like for the older generation who's watching to just make sure that the younger generation have the resources and knowledge equipped to pass on the legacy, or at least politically our democracy.
And do you feel that the older generation actually is helping to prepare you to take over when your time comes to actually lead these efforts?
In a sense, no, because in some cases, like right now with COVID, it seemed like in people like yourself, you do, want to hear from us, but then there are some people who don't. And whenever we do voice our opinions, it's like, oh, you don't really know what you're talking about. You haven't lived life yet.
Well, apparently those folks don't understand that at the height of the civil rights movement, it was young people who went to jail every day, and spent the night in jail and got out of jail and went back to school the next morning and got arrested again. I think a lot of people forget our history, and there has not been one social movement in this country that has not been led by young people. So just know that, right? Pull that out of your toolbox when somebody tells you that, you're just not ready yet, right? Because every movement was led by young people, and none of them would have been successful if young people hadn't just said, "Nah, this isn't right. We gotta fix this." Let's see who's next. Just raise your hand, and I'll call on you, Rudy.
Well, just in my experience, what's the word again? Misperceptions.
Yeah,
I think one of the misperceptions is that, especially for like younger kids, they underestimate what we can do.
Yes.
Yeah, they underestimate like what our ability is, like how smart we are. I mean, that's, yeah,
Is that frustrating?
it is.
I feel you on that. Singer.
Um, I feel that a big misperception is, which was brought up earlier, is that youth are making big asks to our leaders without fully understanding what we're asking for, because we don't have a good understanding of what policies we're asking to be put in place, and we haven't lived a life long enough to be able to fully know what we're saying. But I do feel that a lot of our youth are taking a lot of our time to educate ourselves and each other on the systems that were put in place before we were even born. And I also would like a lot of people to understand that we know that these policies are going to very much affect us in the future. And that is why we're fighting so hard now more than ever to make sure that they're put in place to protect not only our generation, but the generation that comes after us.
Excellent. Yes, yes, absolutely true. Who else? Yes.
I think a misperception that older generations have about the younger generations is that we want the easy way out of things and we don't put in the hard work. But in reality, things have drastically changed from the 70s, and we have to work for a better future, but in a different way. And I think older generations have to start realizing that it has changed, and therefore the younger generations demand change in return.
Yes, excellent, excellent. Who else? Ariana, you want to weigh in on this one?
Yeah, I can. So I was just thinking, I was like, imagine if youth were supported by adults. Like there was that youth and adult partnership that I can trust that person. I know that I'm supported, because that's really important. And with being on the Monomo Youth Commission, I've learned that, and I'm really appreciative of that. But I just, yeah, just like having support from adults, because I feel like even children, youth, young people it can be like we're a marginalized group as well, because yeah, adults say like, oh, we want to hear what your thoughts and opinions are, but nothing ever happens, you know? And it's important to have these conversations, but it's also like, okay, there needs to be action and we need to find a way to get there. And in times like these, we have to support each other no matter what.
Right. Thank you very much. Miss Morgan.
Sure. I think that the older generations need to realize that we push for these things because they don't only affect our future, but they affect the generations after, the generations to come. We're not fighting for this because we're selfish, and we certainly don't expect this to happen overnight. We're fighting for this because it's gone on for way too long. And we know that it's going to take a really long time because systemic change takes so long. But we're fighting for it because it matters. And we know that it matters, and we know that it takes work.
Absolutely true. Mr. Cabbage.
Yeah, so I think that I've kind of noticed this cyclical pattern where leaders don't really engage with youth. And so because they're not engaging with youth, they don't really understand our perspective, which then further marginalizes us and like diminishes our, I guess, standing in like a leadership perspective. And so I think that youth engagement is critical. And while youth might not have as much education or experience as anyone else, I think that engaging with youth and engaging with as many youth as possible better equips you to understand youth perspective. And so breaking that cyclical pattern is super important.
Excellent. Miss Geranu?
It's Garamo, but
Radamo?
yeah,
Okay, got it.
close. But I think a lot of people noted it already, but also I think just the connection, like I think Ariana mentioned, the youth adult partnership is not really a partnership. Oftentimes it's really when we like have moments when we go talk to adults, a lot of them are not really transparent as well. It's really quite difficult to even bring up policies or things that we want. And really, it's really difficult to engage with them as well. I would agree.
And so, do you think when adults invite you in to hear what you think, that they really are interested in what you think, or you think they already have a solution they want to give to you?
I think oftentimes it's really just like they're not really there to actually listen. It's really trying to, I guess, really um, find a way to like kind of like validate their own like solutions that they have, or like try to, I guess, improve the way they look, and not really like actually take the ideas. If they do take youth ideas, it's not really even credited to youth or really meant for like said like, oh, this policy is for youth to, you know, prosper and have like grow. But it's really like, oh, these are some policies that we've thought of that could potentially help the community. And it's not really like directly like talked about, oh, like this is for BIPOC youth, or like, you know, LGBTQ plus youth. It's not really directed towards one group as well. It's really like this broad statement.
Thank you very much. Anybody I leave out on this question? Okay, well, now it's time for you guys to ask me your next question. Who would like to go first on that? Yes, Alana.
Yeah, I think that I don't know, I think that an oversight board is great in some aspects, but also like I've been very involved in, you know, kind of a couple weeks ago, I was a part of the MCSO, Multnomah County Sheriff's Office Use of Force Forum, where we kind of talked about kind of the issues within that. And there's so much nuance within use of force policy. And an oversight board can only do so much if the policies are, you know, not sound, and officers can kind of wiggle themselves out of situations of accountability. So if you were to be police commissioner, how would you make sure that officers are held accountable, not only with the oversight board, but how would you change policies?
Yeah, if I was police commissioner, I would start by totally changing who we recruit to be police, how we train. Today, the perception is only police can train police to be community police officers. And I actually think you cannot have a community police officer unless there's a community member and a police officer co-facilitating all trainings except for tactical training, right? A tactical training is the only training that I think police should do for police. But everything else, if you're trying to create community public servants who are there to solve crimes and protect and serve, you cannot do that in isolation of police. Today, we train police as if they're headed to war. We actually train them in military tactics rather than training them to be thought leaders, rather than training them to be problem solvers. We spend most of our time training them and to be as if they're headed into a war zone rather than into a neighborhood, into a community where they get to be a part of that community's problem solving team, right? So that's what I would do. And it's the whole thing. It's you know, again, who we recruit, who the psychologist is that decides that they are qualified and appropriate to be law enforcement, how we train them, and then be clear about what the expectations are, right? Today in the city of Portland, Portland Police Bureau writes their policy, which I think is insane that we would have the police bureau writing policy on how they're going to interact with the community. So I would change that. I would, and the community oversight board, as well as the Portland Community Engaged Policing Board, would be strong partners in helping us revise what those directives are, and how we make sure that they're behaving in a way that the community wants them to behave, not in a way that police think they should behave. So yes, there would be a lot to do. It wouldn't happen overnight. But what I hope is that the community would start seeing the shift, right? It should not take us a decade to make those transformations within policing. I would call that a failure, right? But if you could see change in 6 months and then see more change in a year, then see more change in 18 months, then we would start seeing that we are in fact totally transforming how that system operates. But I think the very first thing is to remind police officers that they work for us. We pay their salary, they work for us. And so to have a mindset that you are the boss of the community is not people that I want sworn to protect and serve us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome. Who's next? Let's go to Miss Ning.
Hello. How do you envision police officers to be trained to recognize mental illnesses in the future?
I don't want police anywhere near people suffering from mental health issues. I want to have someone who is a trained mental health professional engage with someone suffering from a mental health issue. That's why Portland Street Response is going to be so key, because having a qualified mental health professional go on those calls when someone is experiencing a mental health issue is going to be the only way that we will stop killing people who don't do what they're told because they're in a mental health crisis. So my answer is no police at all. Totally unarmed people who understand that somebody is in fact in crisis. Shalom, are you ready? You pop back in. You ready? You want to answer? No. Arana. I keep adding that extra A. Anna.
Yeah, I had a question about, like, when we were talking about repolicing, do you have any, like, I guess, tangible plans on how to demilitarize officers?
Well, again, the police work for the police commissioner. They are employees. They are public servants, and it will take strong leadership at the top to set a standard for what is and is not acceptable. And so for me, I would say that police officers would never show up in riot gear when people are involved in protests, right? I think police should respond to 911 calls, and they should respond to 911 calls in the most humane way possible. The biggest tool that a police officer should have is their voice, right? Their ability to speak to people, to engage people in conversation. By the time you pull your weapon, you've lost the argument and the conversation, right? Because then you've gone to a very hard line. We should be training police. We should be looking for a police who have good communication skills, who understand that everybody is not the same, right? And that we have to be humble and understanding the differences in how people communicate. So in my mind, that would be key. Rudy, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, my school is near a path called the Springwater Corridor. A lot of homeless people live there near my school by the 205 freeway.
Yes.
Some of my classmates are uncomfortable and don't feel safe when walking past them because they might be yelling or having other problems. But all of my classmates feel bad for them and don't think that it's right how adults ignore them or our government does not help them. We all want to help them. I created a group called Let Liberate Leaders with other kids from second to fifth grade. It is the first elementary leadership group made for kids by kids in Portland Public Schools. We focus on school problems, but we also want to help our community feel safe and especially help the homeless people that live by the school so they are safe too. My question to you is, what are you doing to end homelessness in Portland?
Boy, you don't ask any simple questions, do you, Rudy? I am working, pushing, cajoling us to do much better with folks who are living on the street. My office was the office that advocated for more outdoor shelter space after the pandemic began, I was absolutely appalled to learn that we, in fact, were not creating more shelter, safe space for houseless members even during this pandemic. And in fact, what we were doing, you may have heard that we had added all these shelters, but the shelters we added were simply to spread people out because of the physical distancing requirements that COVID created. Um, and so my office actually pressured the mayor's office and finally got agreement that we could put together 4 outdoor shelter spaces downtown. Um, and let me be clear, that is nowhere near enough because what we have seen is since the COVID crisis has begun, a lot of places that houseless people could go to get in out of the element, to get rest, to go to the restroom, many of those places have been closed down for months, right? So people don't have access to those community spaces anymore. What I think we need to do is to make sure that we have a menu of options for folks who are houseless. So, for example, the city of Portland owns 4 golf courses. I've never been able to get an answer to why the heck we own golf courses, but let's take a golf course and set up many housing and many medical tents and many food tents and make that accessible for houseless people until we are able to actually build housing people can afford to live in. Today, when we at the City Hall talk about affordable housing, it's not affordable housing because what we're building mostly is housing that's at 80% of median family income. Anybody know what median family income is in the city of Portland? It's $82,500, right? So if we're building housing at 80% of that, that means that 90% of our population cannot afford the housing that the city of Portland is calling affordable, right? Because if you don't make $70,000, you're not going to be able to afford the affordable housing unit, right? That's insane to me. We have nonprofit affordable housing developers that are doing excellent work at creating housing at 30% of the median family income. But we can't build fast enough for the need that we have. And my big fear is that when the rent moratorium ends in January, we're going to see a huge influx of newly houseless community members, right? And we don't have a handle on what we're doing now. In my mind, the joint office, though we keep asking for lots more money to address houselessness, we don't really have a plan to address people who are living on the street right now, right? We don't have a coordinated plan, and we need one. And we need to be working with Multnomah County. We need to be working with the City Housing Bureau. We need to be working with with Prosper Portland. We need to be working with every entity that could help us actually resolve this housing crisis that we're in, because it's only going to get worse. So that's what I think we should be doing, and that's what I've been advocating for. But again, it's not in my portfolio, but I've been working very hard to try to address some of the basic needs that our houseless community members have. Like we made sure that more toilets were delivered to folks who are living outside. We're making sure that there's more garbage pickup because again, when you're houseless, you don't have access to that, to those basic needs. And so we have been investing dollars in those programs. But in my mind, we haven't done enough. We haven't acted as if we're in a housing emergency, right? Because we keep doing what we've done for decades and somehow expecting miraculously we're going to fundamentally change what's happening with our houseless community members. And let me just say, how fabulous that you have created an organization with 2nd to 5th graders that actually are committed to making change in our community. And I want to hear more about this at a later time. So thank you for the work that you're doing and the way that you can do it. I'm appreciative of that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Has anybody else not asked me their second question? Yes, Mr. Cabbage.
Yeah, so the past 10 years of policing in Portland have kind of been characterized by this mismanagement and tension between the city government, the Bureau, the Portland Police Association, and the public. And with Wheeler as police commissioner, negotiations between these different shareholders have continued to fall through and action has continued to lag behind. And so if you were police commissioner, how would you make compromises or alter those relationships with these organizations, and especially the Portland Police Association, in order to pass effective legislation?
Uh-huh. Well, again, I would remind Portland Police Association that they are employees and they have to be aware that the universe has shifted radically, and the community has totally different expectations of their role and how they play their role in our community. I think that for too long, we have allowed the police to dictate how much money they need, who the criminals are, where crime is happening. And elected leaders have actually delegated their authority to the police. I want to take that authority back. And if I'm your boss, I don't give you a lot of wiggle room. If you're doing your job right, you got my 100% support. And if you're not doing what I expect you to do as my employee, I'm going to give you an opportunity to correct your behavior. And if you don't correct your behavior, then you're gone. It's that simple, right? Again, police are public servants. They are hired by us to do a job. I don't think I need to negotiate with people for them to do their job. I think we hired them to do a job and we have to evaluate them and find out if they're actually living up to the job we hired them to do. And what we know over this last 3 months is the community says, no, they're not doing the job we've hired them to do. And we want significant changes in how they do their job and how they show up in community. And so if I was police commissioner, that would be my first task, is to say, look, it's a new day. There's a new sheriff in town, right? And this is how we're going to operate from this day forward. And those who didn't want to could go and work for another agency if they wanted to, right? They don't have to stay and work under my leadership, but my leadership would be really clear about what my expectations are of them. Anybody else? Did I miss? Yes, Ms. Scott. I'll come back to you, Mr. Crane, in a sec.
So I very much agree that the demilitarization of the police force is extremely vital in ensuring that the community is safe. But do you feel that the demilitarization of the police force should be reflected in normalizing gun control in the community?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that we have laws on the book that we do not enforce now. And just like when the gun violence reduction team was eliminated in July 1st, by July 15th, when we heard the report of the rise in gun violence in the city of Portland, the knee-jerk reaction was, oh, we disbanded the gun violence reduction team, so we've got to put it back in place, right? Well, the gun violence reduction team had done absolutely nothing to reduce gun violence in the city of Portland. And the reason that gun violence is up in the city of Portland, just like it is in every other major metropolitan city, is because of the economic collapse that we are experiencing, right? And history shows us that whenever there's an economic downturn, violence goes way up, right? I know because a 911 call center is in my portfolio. And what I know is that we have a huge increase in domestic violence related calls. We have a huge increase in child abuse calls, right? And it's not a surprise when people have been contained for months in their homes and they don't know if they're going to have a job to go back to. They don't know if schools are going to start back up, right? People have all this uncertainty, and that anxiety creates the rise in gun violence, right? But it's not because we don't have a gun violence reduction team. It's because people are anxious and people are on edge and people don't know what the future holds for them and their families, right? And the sooner we as government can start painting a picture and a vision about where we head coming out of this pandemic, the calmer community members will be, because they will see a path out of this, right? And I think right now a lot of people just don't see a path out of this. Mr. Crane.
Yes, thank you. In most workplaces, pensions are paid for by their own personal checks. However, in the city of Portland, I've noticed that police pension is getting taken out of through property tax.
Yes.
Instead of, why is that the case? Instead of it coming from their own respective budgets or their own paycheck.
Well, that's long before my time. I don't know how we started with, I don't know the answer to that question, right? But what I do know is you're absolutely right. And we can't even tell what the total amount of money is that we will ultimately pay out in both police and firefighter retirements because it comes out of property tax bills, right? And so, um, I wish I could answer that question. Unfortunately, Crane, I have no clue. I don't know where that came from. I don't know why it's the norm. And I don't know if it's the norm in any other city in Portland, or if it's an Oregon norm, if it's a national norm. I have no idea. But I think the reason that we got here is because I think there is a public perception that first responders, right, whether they're firefighters or police officers, are need to be protected, right, no matter what, right, because they have quote unquote hard jobs, and so their pension has to be protected. But I honestly don't know the answer to that question. I love it when I get a question I don't know the answer to. You can believe I'm going to look that up later so that I actually know the answer to that. Are there any other questions before I go to my next question? Yes, Ms. Morgan.
Thank you. So with changes to the police department, how would resources like detectives and the forensics team change? Because those are pretty valuable.
Well, I wonder if they are valuable. I think that we should look at every specialty unit within Portland Police Bureau. What I know is we have 47 detectives, right? But as I look at caseloads, some detectives have big caseloads, some detectives have almost no caseloads, right? And it doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason to why that happens. It's like whoever the supervisor is dictates where the cases go and who investigates them. I think we need more information about just how they determine what detective works on what. And so, if I was police commissioner, I would take a deep dive into that, because just like back to the example of the gun violence reduction team, I said to Chief Lavelle, you've got 47 detectives. Why don't you just take a couple and have them work on gun violence, right? Why do you need a specialty unit to work on solving gun violence in our community? And he didn't have a good answer for that. But some things are necessary. But like you mentioned, forensics, until there was a federal grant, rape kits sat on a shelf somewhere for years, with no one actually paying any attention to whether or not they were being processed or not, right? I think, and so the police are making decisions every day about what crimes they're going to work on solving and which crimes they're not going to work on solving, what they think is a priority and what they don't think is a priority, right? And I actually think it's the public's job to tell the police what their priorities are and what their priorities should be. But just like the last strategic plan that the police developed, it was developed in isolation of real community conversation and dialogue, right? So when you have a bureau like policing that sits in their office and develops a strategic plan, that's not a plan that the community has bought into because they've had no say in the development of that plan. And I think we have to change how those strategic plans come about, and they have to be more focused on getting the community's voice included before those plans are finalized. So did I get everybody this go round? I'm sorry, Ms. Perez, you're next.
Thank you. So my question is, I think you've done some work around it about it. But what is your vision about reducing the limit and size of our police force, like all police force, especially on TriMet?
Well, as you may know, I've actually made sure that we will not have Portland police officers on TriMet. We cut that program in June of this year. So you will not see Portland police officers on TriMet at all. as well as the school resource officers that were from the city of Portland. You will not see them anymore. You're welcome. So those are gone, thankfully, because as we know, they all had a racially disparate outcome, right? The people who were not the people who were given tickets, the people who were asked to prove that they paid for their fare, the people who were restricted from using TriMet were predominantly black, right? Black and or Latina, right? And it's like it's insane. I mean, I can tell you personally, I was on a Max train late one night, and three big white officers came over demanding me and my friend show proof of payment. And I thought to myself, we were the only two on in the train car, right? And I thought to myself, why did it take three huge officers? And I asked them, I said, so why does it take three of you to ask to see my ticket, right? Well, we're safer when we travel in numbers. Now, for me, as an old woman, that scared me. I can imagine what it would do to a young person who was by themselves or with another young person to have three big armed people coming up demanding proof of payment, right? And by the way, I did have proof of payment. I had paid, but they just assumed, I think because of who I am, that I had just kind of slipped on the train without paying. And we don't want police that come with the assumption that you're involved in criminal behavior, right? We should have law enforcement, we should have police officers that actually see themselves as part of the community and part of keeping the community safe. And that doesn't mean you aggressively confront people. And so I am down to my last question. Did I get everybody? Everybody's got a chance to get in? One more. Yes, ma'am.
My question is, I believe you are like doing budgeting for the coming year.
Yes.
And I think what some of
Yeah.
the, and so like what are the things that you're prioritizing for like youth specifically?
What am I prioritizing for youth specifically? That's a really good question. Other than the two leadership development programs, I can't point to anything that I'm thinking of at the moment that is youth specific. But if you have ideas of some things that I should be prioritizing that are youth specific, I'm very open to that conversation. Okay. Other than the leadership development programs, because what I know is that if you can handle $1 million budget, you can do anything, right? That's why I wanted to make sure those pieces were in place. All right, so my last question to you is a two-parter. When did you decide you wanted to be an advocate? And two, who's your hero or sheroes as you do the work that you do? Who wants to start first? Okay, Miss Ning.
I guess I can answer the second question first. Some of my like personal heroes have to be Gloria Steinem. She led, she was a huge player in the ERA movement, and I respect her so much. And I just love her for that.
Uh-huh.
She like stood up for herself.
Right.
And for advocacy, I started realizing there weren't people in mainstream media that really voiced my concerns. Mm-hmm. So I decided to stick up for myself a bit, and I wanted to involve my friends and just like, hey, you should kind of learn about what's going on and stay relevant, because these are things that will directly affect us in the future. And if we don't understand what's going on, we're basically blind in the situation and we can't have a say. And I didn't even realize how easy it was at first, because you can organize things relatively quickly in the community. Right. So
yeah, especially with all the social media and the other platforms that you have to actually really engage more people more quickly. So I absolutely agree with that. Thank you. Alana.
Yeah, so a couple of my, some people that I look up to that I view as activists are Stacey Abrams. I love Stacey Abrams. I think she just really stands up for what she believes in, and she pushes for it. And I really admire that. And also Marsha P. Johnson. I don't think we often talk about our Black trans women that were really, really instrumental in the LGBT plus rights movement. So yeah, so those are two of my personal heroes or sheroes. And also I became an advocate because I grew up in Southeast Portland, but the really, really, really white area, Selwood area. And I went to a K through 8 that was, 95% white. So I was like among two other people that were brown or and so I basically experienced a lot of racism, as you might suspect, at school, and people violating my boundaries, and having this weird obsession with me because I was a little different than other people, and so really it became a matter of I feel like I wasn't safe. So I was pushed into this activist role. And I think that that's very common for people of color and BIPOC people. And, they were unaware of the concept of racism. I mean, imagine these students unaware of racism, unaware of the hundreds of people that are brutally murdered by the police every year. And we did these like kind of like mock TED Talks in my history class, and I really I wanted to teach my classmates kind of, but I also was pushed into that. I mean, I think that that's very common. And so I talked about police brutality, I talked about microaggressions, I talked about racism, I talked about Islamophobia, all in my middle school, and that's when it really began. And I grew up in a family where my dad he's first gen, and so it was really all about assimilation. So we didn't talk about racism in my family because I'm also part white. And so really it really came down to that. I was there was just a lot of racism in my school, and people using the N-word, white students using the N-word, and really targeting students. And it became a necessity to be an advocate and to really push myself to educate others. And that just really, pushed me to get involved with the Multnomah Youth Commission when I was old enough, as well as Raising Justice, which is a 3-year nonprofit that challenges the systemic oppression that affects young people's public safety. So I've been working heavily on that. And it's just really, I think my background has heavily kind of pushed me into this role, but in a good way. I mean, I love the work, but it's also like, I think that it's a common story that BIPOC folks are pushed into this role because they have no choice. They're not safe. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. Alana, I would love to learn more about your other program that you're working with. So I've heard of 2 new programs that I have not heard of before today, between you and Rudy. So I'm really looking forward to learning more. Ms. Scott.
Thank you. Something I've realized so much is that representation can mean the world to a youth member. And so as Alana brought up, living in the whitest city in the United States as a Black girl and going to public school, it was often very, very hard for me to feel like I was safe enough to share my perspective just because of how different it was. But being able to see you as city commissioner come to my school during an assembly and articulate these policies that I find so important and that I know are going to affect so many people positively. Being able to see Teresa Rayford run for mayor and continue to advocate for the Black community in Portland, another woman of color, AOC, also be able to articulate what she wants to see in the future for youth has just been able to strengthen my dream of being a leader and continuing to work in advocacy. And so one way I've been able to do that is through a platform where I have like a web show with my school, and being able to speak on social issues and topics that I find so important and that so many youth in my area find so important has been amazing. And hoping that I can be that representation for a Black girl or Black girls in general in the future has just really pushed me forward to continue to want to do what I'm doing now.
Here, here. Love that. Let's see. Who's next? Who's ready to go next? Mr. Crane, you ready? Mr. Cabbage, you ready?
Yeah, sure. So, to answer your first part of the question, when did you decide to become an advocate? I feel like my advocacy journey, or I don't know, my involvement in politics more broadly, came out of a place of hopelessness. I kind of wanted to feel more representation and actually wanted to feel some sense of control about things happening around me. And I wanted to be an active participant, like I am now, in these powerful discussions. And so, to answer the second part of the question, who is my hero? I'm not sure if I actually like have a single person in particular, but I really respect and value people who conduct themselves with integrity and have the ability to understand different people's perspectives. And so, I don't know, if you fit that bill, then I mean, you're my hero, I guess. So
I'll take that. That's why we're doing what we're doing today, right? Let's see, Mr. Crane.
Yes. So once again, thank you for the opportunity for BIPOC community to speak. I think what brought me into advocacy was simply just my environment growing up. You know, my family came from, you know, ranges from falsely incarcerated people to Black Panthers in the 70s. So I had the opportunity to get the best of both worlds and input, and just seeing, and me being raised from the church as a Christian man, you know, I've learned that through faith, you're supposed to treat people right. And seeing our government kind of just shift more towards like a, you know, do for yourself, don't do for anybody else. I mean, it just made me want to step up and take up to the plate. And more particularly here in Portland, you know, the Black community here is very small. It's only been maybe about 4 solid generations of African Americans here in this city. So just the thought of having Black people integrated into our society in Portland is kind of still a fresh concept if you're thinking about it time-wise. So I just want to basically be a person to erase that concept of Black people being in the bottom of the totem pole more so, and being actual intellects and people conducting well into society. And as far as your second question, people who I idolize or whatnot, Fred Hampton comes to mind first because of how he mobilized the community in Chicago at just the young age of 21. He did a lot. And seeing Barack be able to be the president of the United States as an African American brought me to further to this. And then seeing you, you know, it in our city commission in a state where they didn't even allow Black people to be here is great to see, and it just pushes me to go further.
Here, here. Thank you. Miss Perez.
Yeah, so for the first question about when did I become an advocate, I was thinking about that, and I remembered that I became an advocate when I learned English. And with that came going to the doctors with my family and translating documents for them and making sure that I was giving them the right information and nothing, and I wouldn't miss anything, any important information. But I just think about like all the work that we're doing, it's because people's lives depend on it. It's because it feels like life or death. And it's like pain and beauty. It's so constant and it's every day, but we just can't give up. And then for the second question, I just look up to all the BIPOC leaders, young and old, everyone.
Thank you. Who did I miss? Sion.
For the first question, I would say I think it really just started. I think also kind of just like when I realized what was around me, like I think probably once I like started school and like, you know, being in, you know, Oregon and how white it is, and just realizing like English was not my first language either. So being an immigrant, it was kind of where is my place? Where am I? And I've gone through public school, but I think when I really like transitioned and was privileged enough to even go to private school, I think I realized that this, like how different it is and how much like, I think even Alana mentioned like how white people don't realize like there is racism in this world. There's a lot of things. And I think I felt like very much excluded from that. And I think it was really by force. I wanted to go out and see like what could I do, even just for, you know, those who I know. And really like it was really like by force almost. Like I didn't have like another place to really go to. And I think finding like other people who could advocate with me about like the issues and the struggles that we go through, then that was like, okay, this is what I want to do. This is like who I want to surround myself with. And I think that's really led me to, I think, meeting a lot of people in this phone call, or like this Zoom call, and also really just like Multnomah Youth Commission, raising justice, whatever it really is really led me to like these organizations and being able to, I guess, express our desires as youth. And for the second question, I think I would say my family. I think that's cliche, but and I would also just say really anybody who has been in my steps before and has provided like a path for me as well. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Did I leave anybody out? Rudy, how could I have left you out? What am I thinking?
Um, well, I think um one of my I mean, I I have a lot of role models. Actually, the person who probably introduced me to like activism is my teacher, Ron Morgan, and my family. Um, my teacher, the he's the chess coach at our school, and he's a really good activist. He like loves to talk about Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, and yeah, he's really good at talking about that stuff.
Excellent. And the second part of the question, your heroes or sheroes?
Um, and um, my hero, some of my heroes, um, like probably the usuals, like John Lewis, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. Like if you heard his or her name, those are my heroes.
Very cool, very cool. Did that get everybody in on the last question? Miss Morgan, how could I forget?
Yeah, so, oh, sorry.
I said, how could I forget you?
Oh, no, it's fine. I started my work in advocacy about a year ago, but honestly, growing up in Southwest Portland in predominantly white neighborhoods and schools, I could really see a problem. Just, yeah, growing up in that environment with a lack of BIPOC community members. And then it really fully skyrocketed when we started talking about all the racist issues at my school, Wilson. And that's kind of just where it came from. And since then, I've been able to work with Next Up and help my community get through those issues and solve those issues, which they, don't get me wrong, they haven't been solved, but we are doing the work. The work's there. As far as my, I guess, sheroes, it's amazing to see BIPOC women in a place where really BIPOC people were never supposed to be accepted. It's amazing to see that empower you, Representative Lawrence Spence, Rep. Janelle Bynum, and all BIPOC women and men who have done the work before us.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think we covered everybody, yes? Oh my gosh. Let me just say, the future is in great hands. You guys are all absolutely phenomenal. And your voices are so necessary as we come out of this current crisis that we're in, because we get to rebuild a more just, a more equitable city of Portland, and you are a large part of that. And I will follow up about the organizations that I've heard of today that I haven't had not heard of before today. And that's what's exciting. What's exciting is knowing that you're doing the work. But young people have always done the work. The question is whether or not the old folks are listening to the work that you're doing. And that's why this forum is so important. And so thank you, thank you, thank you. I hope you will continue to be engaged as we rethink Portland and as we reimagine what real community safety looks like, because safety means safety for all of us, right? Regardless of what part of the city we live in, regardless of what our ethnicity, race, age, right? We should all be able to walk out of our doors and feel like we are in a welcoming community. And until that's true for all of us, we have a lot of work to do. But I got to tell you, you have inspired me today to continue to work as hard as I've been working, and to just put a little bit more into it. And I'm going to challenge you. If you have good ideas about how the city of Portland could invest some resources that would help young people as we get through this crisis, please share them with my office, because October 28th is the next time we look at the city's budget, and it's called the fall bump process. And I've got some ideas going in, but these community conversations are where I get the best ideas that I can then move forward. And so, in closing, let me just say this was one in a series of community meetings that we're having around Rethink Portland. And please go to the website rethinkportland.com, sign up for announcements, and if you have new ideas, put them into. There's a place for you to put your ideas in. And I truly look forward to our next opportunity to come together, so that we all are connected and making sure that as we rebuild, we really are rebuilding a community that is equitable and just for us all. And I'm hoping that over the next couple of weeks, you'll start seeing billboards and posters up all over town that's actually directing people to this initiative, rethinkportland.com. Thank you all. I am grateful that you chose to spend a couple of hours with me today. And I am appreciative of you because you've taken the time to be here and use your authentic voice. Show up, show up. That's half the battle, right? Come to city council, make your voice heard. Make sure you're writing to your elected leaders, whether they're on a city council, whether they're your legislators, whether they're your congressional leaders, right? Make sure that your voices are included, because again, young people are the only ones that have ever changed the world. And without your voice, we're left with old people like me trying to figure it out. So thank you. Have a great afternoon, and keep up the excellent work you're already doing. Take care. Bye bye.
So much. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye bye.
you.
We'll do this again. Bye bye.